What if I told you the world you see, touch, hear, and believe in might not be real? Not because it doesn't exist, but because your brain is filtering, twisting, and reconstructing it every single moment. You are not seeing the world as it is. You are seeing it as your brain wants you to. In today's video, we're diving into one of the most mind-bending questions in neuroscience and psychology. Do you perceive reality, or just a version of it? We'll explore how your brain processes the outside world, how your senses gather information, and how your brain adds emotion, memory, and bias to turn that raw data into something it calls reality. From visual illusions to emotional filters, cognitive shortcuts to false memories, you'll discover just how manipulated your experience of the world really is. So sit back, open your mind, and get ready to question everything, even your own thoughts. Because by the end of this video, one thing will be clear: reality isn't what happens. It's what your brain thinks happened. What if the world you're seeing isn't the world that truly exists? What if your brain, the very thing you rely on to make sense of everything, is actually lying to you? You might think your senses give you a direct connection to reality, that what you see is what's out there, that what you hear, feel, taste, and smell is an honest representation of the external world. But science says otherwise. Your brain is not a passive recorder. It doesn't take in reality like a camera or a microphone. Instead, it's more like a storyteller, one that picks and chooses the details, filters them through emotion, memory, and bias, then builds a narrative that feels right. You don't perceive the world directly. You perceive a reconstruction, a filtered, modified, and highly personal version of it. In this video, we're going to explore a question that philosophers, neuroscientists, and psychologists have been obsessed with for centuries. Do you perceive the world as it really is, or only as your brain allows you to? We'll uncover the science of perception, how your eyes, ears, and skin pick up raw data, how your brain adds its own meaning to what you sense. Why do people can experience the same event and walk away with completely different realities? And how illusions, hallucinations, and even emotions prove that what you see and what's real are often not the same. This isn't just a fun thought experiment. Understanding how perception works can help you spot your cognitive blind spots, improve your decision-making, deepen empathy for others who see things differently, and even begin to take back control over how you experience the world. Because once you realize your brain is filtering reality, you can start to question your assumptions, your beliefs, and even your memories. So stay with me until the end, because what you're about to discover might just change how you see everything. Literally. Among all your senses, vision dominates the brain's processing power. A surprisingly large portion of your cerebral cortex, nearly 30%, is devoted to visual processing, more than to any other sense. This makes sight your most neurologically expensive way of experiencing the world. But even with all this brain power behind it, what you see is far from a direct window into reality. Your eyes are powerful tools, but they don't capture the world as it truly is. The retina, located at the back of your eye, acts like a biological camera sensor. It's a flat, two-dimensional sheet that converts light into electrical signals, raw data that the brain must interpret. But the world we live in is three-dimensional, full of depth, distance, and motion. So how do we experience such rich, immersive visual scenes if the information we receive is so flat and incomplete? The answer lies in the brain's remarkable ability to infer. Because the retina can't see depth on its own, the brain uses a variety of visual cues to build a 3D interpretation from 2D input. It notices occlusion. When one object blocks another, it's assumed to be closer. It pays attention to relative size. If two objects are known to be similar in size, the one that appears smaller must be farther away. It also compares disparities between the two eyes, known as binocular vision, to triangulate depth and position. All of this happens without your awareness. You don't consciously calculate distances or figure out which object is overlapping another. Your brain does the math for you in milliseconds, filling in gaps, making assumptions, and presenting you with what feels like a seamless image of reality. But remember, it's an illusion of completeness. Your brain is working with partial information and doing its best to interpret it. And that means what you see is not always what is, it's what your brain believes is there. This is both powerful and limiting. It allows you to navigate the world efficiently and automatically, but it also leaves you vulnerable to visual illusions, false memories, and biased interpretations. Because what you see is not the world itself. It's the version of the world that your brain constructs for you. In addition to how your eyes interpret shape and depth. Consider the sheer bandwidth of the information that enters your brain through sight. The optic nerve, the biological cable that transfers visual data from your retina to your brain, contains around 1 million fibers. Each of these fibers carries information from a specific part of your visual field. You can think of each fiber like a pixel, delivering a small piece of the visual puzzle that your brain must reconstruct. This million-fiber cable acts as your primary uplink to the visual world. Every second, those signals are racing into the brain, not as complete images but as fragmented streams of light, color, contrast, and motion. And then begins the incredible work of interpretation. The brain doesn't just receive these raw inputs and display them like a photograph. It assembles, edits, and often enhances them, merging what's actually there with what it expects to see. That's why, sometimes, your perception can be tricked by illusions or assumptions. Your brain is working with limited data, just those million signals, give or take, and from that, it's constructing a model of the external world. Even more remarkably, the brain doesn't just process this incoming information, it constantly decides what to ignore. Because not all pixels are treated equally. Some get prioritized, some are blurred out, and others are completely disregarded. What you're focused on, what you believe to be important, and even your emotional state all influence which parts of the incoming visual data are highlighted and which are thrown away. So although 1 million fibers might sound like a lot, in reality, your brain is always making trade-offs, building a visual reality that is not entirely objective, but optimized for survival, meaning, and attention. It's not the world as it is, but the world as your brain decides you need to see it. Your eye, in terms of raw resolution, is surprisingly limited. Its resolution is estimated to be about 1 megapixel, which, by modern digital standards, would be considered a very low-quality camera. But here's where biology outsmarts technology. Instead of evenly distributing its neural resources, the eye has evolved a clever strategy. It concentrates the majority of its high-resolution fibers, the photoreceptor-dense cones, at the very center of your field of vision, in a tiny region called the fovea. This design means that only the part of the world you're directly looking at is seen in high detail. Everything else, it's a blur, intentionally so. Your brain fills in the gaps with guesswork, memory, and context. It creates the illusion of a sharp and richly detailed visual field, but in truth, you only see clearly a small thumbnail-sized area at any one time. This is why your eyes are always darting around, making tiny rapid movements called saccades. Without these constant flicks, you'd be stuck with a narrow, pixelated view of the world. But your brain is a master of illusion. It stitches these glimpses together into a seamless panoramic experience. The result is an illusion of continuity, a full-color, high-definition reality that doesn't exist in the raw data coming in. So, not only is your eye relatively low in resolution, but your experience of seeing is a construction, a well-edited story created by your brain to make sense of a world it can never fully capture in one glance. And yet, despite the technical limitations of your eyes, you don't feel as though your vision is limited at all. You don't walk around perceiving the world as a small, sharply focused circle surrounded by a blur of guesswork. Instead, your experience of seeing feels complete. The entire visual field in front of you appears rich, clear, and continuous. It's as if the world is projected into your consciousness in perfect, uniform resolution. But this, too, is an illusion. Your brain is fooling you and doing it on purpose. Over millions of years, your nervous system has evolved not to present you with an accurate, high-definition rendering of reality, but rather, to provide just enough information to help you survive. That means recognizing a predator in the bushes, spotting ripe fruit, or detecting the subtle micro-expressions on someone's face that hint at danger or attraction. What you see is not the world as it is, but the world as your brain predicts it should be, stitched together from fragments, filled in with memories, guided by expectations. It prioritizes utility over precision, efficiency over completeness. Your visual system is optimized not for truth, but for action. So while it may feel like you have a wide-angle, ultra-high-resolution view of the world at all times, you're actually seeing a hallucination that aligns with your evolutionary goals. Reality, in this sense, is not directly perceived but creatively and constantly interpreted. The brain processes only a narrow slice of the information available in the environment at any given moment. The raw sensory data that actually reaches your conscious awareness is surprisingly limited. What you see, hear, smell, touch, and taste is not a complete representation of the world but a carefully constructed approximation. To compensate for this sensory bottleneck, your brain fills in the blanks. It invents details that were never sensed, smooths over gaps in perception, and creates a seamless, continuous experience of reality. This process, selective perception combined with creative reconstruction, is not a flaw in human cognition. It's a feature. You're not meant to perceive everything. Instead, evolution has shaped your perception to be efficient rather than exhaustive. By focusing only on what seems most relevant to your survival or your current goals, your brain saves resources and reacts more quickly. Meanwhile, it quietly fills in the missing parts based on past experience, expectations, and context. This is the core of what some psychologists call perceptual tunnel vision. We zoom in on a few relevant signals, while the brain paints in the rest of the scene to make it feel whole. And because we're largely unaware of how much is invented or inferred, we move through life with the comforting illusion that our senses are offering us a complete and faithful view of the world when, in truth, much of what we see or know is generated from within. This theme-limited input, enhanced output is one of the most fascinating principles of human perception. It shows that your experience of the world is not simply a reflection of reality but a construction created by your brain, one that is shaped by biology, filtered by attention, and colored by memory. Even though our skin is the largest organ of the body, stretching over every inch of us and packed with receptors for touch, temperature, pressure, and pain, we still rely most heavily on our eyes to navigate and interpret the world around us. Vision dominates our sensory experience. It's the one sense we trust above all others to tell us what's really there. And yet, our vision is surprisingly limited. Compared to other species, humans aren't particularly well equipped. Take the eagle, for example. With eyes that are 4 to 5 times sharper than ours, an eagle can spot a small rodent moving from hundreds of feet in the air. Their visual acuity, depth perception, and motion tracking are on an entirely different level. Compared to them, we're practically stumbling through the world in a blur. Still, because our brains are such masterful illusionists, we don't notice these limitations. We feel as though we see everything clearly, in rich detail and vibrant color, when in truth, we're receiving only a narrow slice of visual information, much of which is filled in automatically by the brain based on expectations and context. So while your eyes may be your primary tool for perception, they are far from perfect. And the sense of clarity you rely on so much is, in many ways, an elaborate neurological guess, not a direct reflection of reality. Even so, despite all its limitations, our visual system is nothing short of astonishing. To interpret the chaotic flood of light that enters our eyes every moment, your brain performs an extraordinary feat of organization, pattern recognition, and prediction. And to accomplish this, the brain devotes an enormous amount of cortical real estate, more than to any other sense, purely to the processing of visual information. It's estimated that roughly 1/3 of the human brain is involved in visual processing in some way, from decoding color and motion to interpreting depth, perspective, and object identity. The visual system is a layered hierarchy of specialized areas that work together in real time to create the seamless picture of the world you rely on. This investment of neural resources reflects how vital vision is to human survival and interaction. Even with its imperfections, low resolution outside the fovea, blind spots, optical illusions, and guesswork, your brain manages to construct a stable, continuous, and meaningful world from fragmented data. That's not just perception, it's cognitive magic. The development of the visual system offers a fascinating glimpse into how the brain itself grows and adapts. Like many other neural systems, our ability to see is shaped by both biology and experience. At birth, the brain comes equipped with basic predispositions wiring that expects visual input and is prepared to interpret it. But these neural pathways are not fully functional without proper stimulation from the outside world. If a baby doesn't receive the right kind of visual experience during critical developmental windows, say, due to cataracts, congenital blindness, or prolonged darkness, the visual system can fail to develop normally, even if the eyes themselves are healthy. In some cases, even correcting the visual input later, such as removing a cataract, may not fully restore sight because the brain missed its opportunity to form the necessary connections during those early years. This tells us something profound. The brain isn't just a passive receiver of information, it's an active builder of systems that depend on interaction with the environment. The visual system, in particular, must be sculpted by light, color, motion, and depth. Without these experiences, even a well-structured brain won't reach its full potential. In this way, vision becomes a metaphor for all of brain development. We're born with a blueprint, but it's the life we live and the world we perceive that bring that blueprint to life. The creation of neurons is only the beginning of the brain's intricate construction process. Birth alone is not enough. Once a neuron is formed, it must migrate to the right place in the brain's architecture, journey that requires precision and coordination. This is step 2, neuron migration. If a neuron ends up in the wrong location, it may form faulty connections or fail to integrate into the network altogether. But even after reaching its destination, a neuron isn't automatically part of the brain's functional circuit. That's where the third step begins, wiring up meaningful connections with other neurons. And this step, the formation of functional synapses, is profoundly influenced by experience. The brain is not a rigid machine. It adapts and sculpts itself based on the signals it receives. Neurons that remain isolated, without input from neighboring cells, simply die off. This natural pruning ensures that only the neurons engaged in active communication survive and contribute to the brain's growing network. It's a process that optimizes efficiency, preserves resources, and makes room for stronger, more reliable connections. In other words, U-shaped structure. It's not enough for a neuron to be alive. It must be part of a meaningful conversation within the brain. And that conversation depends on what we see, hear, feel, learn, and do. Experience wires the brain, and without that stimulation, even the most promising neuron will wither away in silence. This principle doesn't just apply broadly to brain development, it's especially crucial in the formation of the visual system. Vision, more than many other sensory systems, depends heavily on what neuroscientists call a critical period, a specific window of time in early life when the brain must receive the right kind of sensory input to develop properly. During this critical period, the brain is extraordinarily plastic. Its circuits are flexible and responsive. Visual neurons are waiting for signals, patterns of light, contrast, motion, color. If these signals arrive as expected, the system matures normally, and complex visual perception becomes possible. But if visual input is absent or disrupted during this window due to cataracts, blindness, or a misalignment, then the visual cortex may not develop the proper architecture, even if the physical eyes are later repaired. This is why restoring sight to someone who was blind from birth isn't as simple as flipping the switch. If the brain never learned how to interpret visual signals during that narrow window of opportunity, restoring the mechanics of sight doesn't guarantee meaningful vision. The brain must know what to do with the data. And after the critical period ends, that plasticity rapidly declines. So while early experiences shape all sensory systems, the visual system reminds us just how time-sensitive that shaping process can be. What you see in the early years literally builds the brain's capacity to keep seeing. And if that window closes without the right input, some doors of perception may stay closed forever. The visual system offers a fascinating lens through which to understand the hidden mechanisms of perception, especially the shortcuts, simplifications, and illusions our brain relies on without our awareness. Vision isn't a perfect mirror of reality. It's a construction, stitched together from fragments, assumptions, and predictive guesses. The visual system is especially adept at creating the illusion of completeness, even when sensory input is sparse or distorted. This makes it a perfect showcase for how perception works more broadly. We don't see the world as it is, we see the world as the brain thinks it should be. Whether it's filling in blind spots, resolving ambiguous shapes, or stabilizing a chaotic field of view with each saccade of our eyes. The visual system teaches us this fundamental truth: perception is not passive. It's a powerful, active interpretation of incomplete information. Through vision, we glimpse the larger truth about the brain. It is not designed to reveal objective reality, but to deliver a useful, survivable version of it. Visible light is made up of photons, tiny, massless packets of energy that travel in waves and bounce off the objects they encounter. These photons carry the information that your visual system interprets as color, shape, and motion. But here's the twist: light itself is not color. Color is something your brain adds to the equation. The electromagnetic spectrum, of which light is only a sliver, stretches far beyond what we can detect from the long, lazy waves of radio frequencies to the frenetic flickers of gamma rays. Yet, humans can only perceive a narrow band of this immense spectrum, roughly from 400 to 700 nanometers in wavelength. This tiny range, what we call visible light, is just a thin slice of reality, a filtered window through which our brains construct a usable version of the world. Why this slice? Because it's enough. Through evolution, we've adapted to see the photons that carry the most useful information for our survival: to spot ripe fruit, recognize a face, detect danger in motion, or navigate the contours of a familiar path. We don't need to see X-rays or ultraviolet beams to survive. So we don single quotes T. Our sensory system isn't designed to reveal the entire truth of the universe, just the part that helps us stay alive. And that part, stitched together by perception, is what we call reality. But it's only one version of it. Of all the countless photons bouncing and scattering through the external world, only a minuscule fraction actually enter your eyes. These particles of light pass through your cornea, are finally focused by the eye's natural lens, and then land on the retina, the light-sensitive canvas lining the back of your eyeballs. Here, the real magic begins. On this delicate sheet of tissue lie millions of photoreceptors, specialized cells called rods and cones that translate the raw energy of photons into electrical signals. Rods help you see in dim light. Cones allow you to perceive color and fine detail. But neither of them sees in the way you might think. They are simply triggered by different wavelengths of light and send that information forward into your nervous system. What follows is a cascade, a rapid relay of signals that travel from the retina through the optic nerve, making their way toward deeper regions of the brain. And this is just the beginning of the journey. The brain will interpret, refine, guess, and even invent parts of the visual field before you're ever consciously aware of seeing anything at all. So when you look around, What you're experiencing is not light itself but a carefully crafted mental construction. A neural painting built from tiny bursts of photon energy, filtered through your biology, and painted into awareness by the only artist you'll ever know, your brain. Your retina, the thin, complex tissue lining the back of your eye, is home to two specialized types of photoreceptor cells, rods and cones, named for their distinctive shapes. But these cells aren't evenly distributed across the retina. Their placement is anything but random. It's a map carefully drawn by evolution. At the very center of your field of vision lies a tiny, crater-like region called the fovea, and this is where the cone photoreceptors dominate. Cones are responsible for sharp detail and color vision, and they perform best in bright light. When you focus your gaze directly on something, say, a face, a flower, a phone screen, you're directing that image onto the cone-rich center of your retina. This is where your visual system gets its clearest, most vibrant information. But the farther you move away from the center of the retina, the more the cones taper off. In their place, rods become more prevalent. Rods don't detect color, but they are exquisitely sensitive to light, allowing you to see in dim environments, albeit in shades of gray. They're what let you navigate your bedroom at night or catch movement in the shadows at the edge of your vision. So, your eyes have evolved a clever division of labor. Cones handle high-resolution color in your central vision, while rods cover the periphery, alerting you to motion and letting you see when the lights go low. And yet, somehow, your brain takes this patchy input from different types of cells, from different parts of the retina, each with its own strengths and weaknesses, and weaves it together into a seamless, colorful, richly detailed picture of the world. You don't see with cones or with rods, you just see. And that illusion of completeness, that's your brain doing what it does best, filling in the gaps, editing reality, and giving you a world that feels stable and whole even though it's anything but. In the very center of your retina, the fovea, your cone photoreceptors are not just densely packed. They are intricately wired with remarkable precision. Each cone, responsible for capturing light and color, is individually connected to a single bipolar cell, which in turn communicates with a single ganglion cell, the cells that send visual information out of the eye and into the brain. This one-to-one wiring system is like having a private, dedicated transmission line for every pixel of your central vision. No blending, no overlapping, just pure, undiluted signal. It's this exact structure that gives your foveal vision its razor-sharp clarity. When you look directly at something, reading small text, recognizing a face, or spotting a tiny detail, it's this part of your retina doing all the heavy lifting. But this ultra-detailed transmission system comes at a cost. It's only possible because there are so few cones relative to the size of the visual field. That's why only a tiny fraction of your entire vision, about the size of your thumbnail at arm's length, is actually this sharp. And yet, your brain tricks you into believing that everything you see is just as crisp. In reality, your brain is constantly stitching together snapshots, taken from tiny eye movements called saccades, and filling in the rest based on expectation, memory, and context. So the high-definition world you think you see, it's mostly a beautiful illusion crafted in real time by a brain that's far more interested in survival and efficiency than in high-fidelity realism. But once you move away from the very center of the retina, the fovea, the picture changes dramatically. Out here in the peripheral regions, cones become fewer, and a different type of photoreceptor takes over, the rods. These rod-shaped photoreceptors are designed not for color or fine detail, but for sensitivity. They're the reason you can see in dim light, detect motion in the shadows, or catch a sudden flicker out of the corner of your eye. But they're not equipped for precision, and like the cones in the fovea, which each have a private communication line to the brain, rods must share their channels. Several rods, sometimes dozens, funnel their signals into the same ganglion cell, blending their inputs into a single message. This pooling system sacrifices detail for sensitivity. It's like many voices shouting into the same microphone. You'll hear that something is there, but you won't know exactly what. And there's more. Rods can't detect color. Their job is to detect light intensity, not hue. That's why your color vision fades as soon as light levels drop. You're switching from cone-dominated daytime vision to rod-dominated night vision. In that transition, the vibrant world becomes shades of gray dots. So while cones give us clarity and color, rods give us perception in the dark, motion detection, and the broader visual field. And your brain balances these two systems constantly, seamlessly integrating precision and sensitivity to craft a world that seems rich, colorful, and detailed. Even when it is in single quotas. In reality, your visual experience is a careful illusion. Your brain fills in the gaps, sharpens the blurry, adds color to the grayscale, and projects a seamless image onto the canvas of your mind. The truth is, you see far less than you think you do, but what you see is exactly what evolution needed you to see. This difference in how cones and rods connect to upstream neurons shapes their distinct roles in how we see the world. Cones, concentrated at the center of the retina, especially in the fovea, are the high-acuity specialists. They give us the razor-sharp detail needed to read a book, recognize faces, or inspect a painting. Every time your eyes jump from one spot to another while scanning a page, you're directing this central zone to gather high-resolution, color-rich information. This is why, when you're focusing on a word, everything else in your visual field, the edges of the page, the background, is blurrier than you realize. Your brain fills in the blanks so smoothly, you don't notice. Rods, in contrast, dominate the peripheral retina and play a very different role. They're not interested in fine detail or color. Instead, they help you detect movement, navigate in low light, and respond quickly to changes in the environment. Their design, grouping multiple rods to one ganglion cell, means they trade precision for sensitivity. They're the silent guardians of your vision at night and in the margins of your awareness. This architecture of cones for clarity and color, rods for motion and darkness, isn't just clever. It's efficient. It lets the brain prioritize what's important right now, focusing your resources where they're needed most, and leaving the rest to be approximated, guessed, or simply ignored. And through it all, your brain keeps up the illusion of a full, detailed world, because that's what perception truly is, not a mirror of reality, but a best-guess simulation. And your rods and cones are just the first players in this grand internal performance, because cones maintain a one-to-one connection with their upstream neurons. They are able to send highly specific, localized information about the light that hits a tiny spot in your field of view. This direct line of communication allows for exquisite spatial resolution. Each cone is like its own tiny reporter, transmitting updates from its assigned pixel in the visual world. But what makes cones even more remarkable is their diversity. We have 3 different types of cones, each tuned to respond to a specific range of light wavelengths. One is more sensitive to shorter wavelengths, which we perceive as blue, another to medium wavelengths, green, and the third to longer wavelengths, red. They don't work in isolation. Color perception emerges from comparison. It's the relative activity among these 3 cone types that lets your brain decode the rich tapestry of hues you see every day. When you see a ripe strawberry, it's not because your brain detects red directly. Instead, it's comparing signals. How strongly are the red-sensitive cones firing compared to the green and blue? That interplay, that dynamic balancing act, is how we perceive colors. So, although cones are tiny and passive on their own, together they form the foundation of your color vision, an elegant code that turns waves of light into the vibrancy of a sunset, the subtlety of skin tones, or the kaleidoscope of a blooming garden. It's not just a passive mirror of the world, it's an interpretation, a reconstruction. And it begins with these 3 specialized cells working in harmony, while cones specialize in high resolution and color-rich vision. Rods are built for a very different job, detecting light in low-light environments. They are the unsung heroes of your night vision, and like cones, which enjoy a one-to-one connection with upstream neurons, rods operate in groups. Multiple rods converge onto a single downstream neuron. This means that if any one of those rods catches a photon, just one tiny particle of light, it will trigger a response. This setup gives rods much higher sensitivity to light, which is why we're able to see in dim lighting. Like when you're trying to navigate your home in the middle of the night without turning on a light. But there's a trade-off. Because the downstream neuron can't tell which rod sent the signal, the brain sacrifices spatial precision. It knows something was detected somewhere in that group of rods, but not exactly where. That's why your peripheral vision is blurrier, even though it's more sensitive to movement and changes in light. In short, the edge of your vision is great for alerting you that something is happening, but not so good at telling you exactly what. And there's another limitation. Rods don't come in multiple types. There's only one kind, which means they provide no color information. That's why in the dark, everything appears washed out in shades of gray and black. You might see movement, you might sense shape, but you won't know if that shirt is red or green until the lights are back on. Together, rods and cones form a dual system, one tuned for clarity and color in bright light, and the other tuned for sensitivity and survival in the shadows. Your brain blends their input into a seamless visual experience, but beneath that illusion lies a clever and intricate design. The journey of visual information doesn't stop at the photoreceptors. Once rods or cones detect light, they pass their signals to the upstream cells of the retina, specifically bipolar cells and ganglion cells, which are arranged in carefully structured networks. Each of these cells has what's called a receptive field, meaning they are sensitive to light detected in a specific part of the visual field. When a photoreceptor within that receptive field gets activated, the signal is passed along to its associated bipolar cell, then to a ganglion cell, which acts like the final messenger within the retina. These ganglion cells bundle their long fibers together, forming what we know as the optic nerve. This is the cable that sends your visual world to the brain. But where exactly in the brain does this information go? The optic nerve carries these signals straight to the thalamus, a deep and ancient part of the brain often referred to as the relay station. From there, the information is routed to the primary visual cortex, located at the very back of the brain in the occipital lobe. Here, something remarkable happens. The visual cortex is organized in modular columns of neurons, each finely tuned to detect specific features of the visual world, such as edges, orientation, movement, and color. Some columns respond best to vertical lines, others to diagonal ones. Some are sensitive to motion, while others specialize in color detection. It's as if your brain has built a massive, collaborative processing center, where different teams of neurons each take a piece of the puzzle and process it simultaneously. And once all the pieces are processed, the brain reconstructs your rich and continuous visual experience. But remember, it's always a reconstruction, not a direct feed from reality, but a simulated model, constantly updated, corrected, and shaped by your expectations, experience, and attention. These modular columns in the visual cortex aren't just a random collection of neurons, they're an architectural masterpiece of specialization. Each set of columns is dedicated to a very specific aspect of the visual world, and they work together like the departments of a vast, efficient company. In one set of columns, there are cells that respond best to bars or edges of light at particular angles, horizontal, vertical, or diagonal. These orientation-specific neurons are the building blocks of shape and structure detection. Without them, your brain wouldn't be able to distinguish the edge of a table from the line of a shadow. In another set of columns, often called blobs, clusters of neurons process color information. These cells are tuned to detect differences in the wavelength of light, allowing us to perceive the rich spectrum of colors that bring our world to life. Without them, a sunset would be reduced to a grayscale gradient, and a strawberry would look no different from a lime. Other columns are finely tuned to motion to detect direction, speed, and changes in position over time. These motion-sensitive neurons help you notice the sudden appearance of a bird flying across your vision or a car coming around the corner. And as you move farther upstream in the brain's visual processing hierarchy, the complexity increases. Beyond the primary visual cortex V1, information flows to higher-order regions like V2, V4, and the inferotemporal cortex. These areas specialize in recognizing faces, objects, and scenes. Some neurons respond only to faces, others to hands, or to places you've been before. These high-level visual areas allow you not just to see, but to understand what you're seeing. By the time visual signals reach these upper levels, they've been transformed from dots of light into meaningful representations of your environment. Your brain knows it's not just looking at color and contrast, it's looking at a cat, a stop sign, or your best friend's smile. And all of this happens in milliseconds, so fast, so seamlessly, that it feels as though you simply see the world. But in truth, your brain is assembling a visual reality from fragments, shortcuts, and best guesses. You're not just seeing, you're constructing. We know that these brain regions are highly specialized thanks to compelling and complementary lines of evidence, stimulation studies, and lesion studies. In the first line of research, scientists and clinicians have been able to directly stimulate specific areas of the brain either in animal models or in human patients undergoing neurosurgical procedures for conditions like epilepsy. When certain regions are stimulated, very specific and predictable perceptual experiences or behavioral responses occur. For instance, stimulating the fusiform face area in the temporal lobe can trigger visual distortions of faces or the sudden sensation that one is seeing a face where none exists. Stimulating motion-sensitive areas can create the perception of movement, even when nothing is moving. These experiments tell us that specific patches of brain tissue are wired to interpret very specific kinds of sensory input, but it's not just stimulation that reveals this specialization. The second line of evidence comes from patients who have suffered damage to discrete areas of the brain, whether through injury, stroke, tumor, or surgical removal. These circumscribed lesions can lead to strikingly specific deficits, depending on where they occur. A bullet wound to one area might leave someone unable to recognize faces, a condition called prosopagnosia, while a tumor pressing on another region could impair motion detection or the ability to perceive colors. For example, damage to the V4 area of the visual cortex can lead to a rare condition called achromatopsia, in which the individual loses the ability to perceive color altogether, even though the eyes and optic nerves remain fully functional. Similarly, damage to the V5 mount region, which processes motion, can cause a kinetopsia, a bizarre condition where the world appears to be a series of frozen frames, like a stuttering slideshow. What all of this tells us is that the brain is not a general-purpose processor where every part can do any job. Instead, it is a highly modular and organized organ, with distinct regions dedicated to specific perceptual, cognitive, and behavioral functions. These modules are not interchangeable, but they do communicate with one another, creating the illusion of a seamless, unified experience. And perhaps most intriguingly, when one of these modules is damaged, the brain may attempt to compensate, especially if the injury occurs early in life. But there are limits to this plasticity. Some functions, particularly those linked to highly specialized regions, may never be fully recovered. This deeply interwoven system of specialized but cooperative brain regions underscores a key insight. We do not perceive the world directly. We perceive what our brains allow and are biologically prepared to perceive. This deeply modular architecture argues against the popular myth that we perceive the world exactly as it is. If our brains were simply receiving and projecting the world like a passive camera, then damage to a small portion of it wouldn't create such bizarre and specific distortions. You'd either see or not see. But in reality, the picture is far more complex. Take prosopagnosia, for example, commonly known as face blindness. This is a condition in which people lose the ability to recognize faces, sometimes even those of their closest family members or their own reflection in the mirror. Their eyes still work. Their general vision is unimpaired. They can see eyes, noses, mouths, but they can't put the parts together into a recognizable whole. This is because one very specific region of the brain, known as the fusiform face area FFA, has been damaged or is underactive. Remarkably, these individuals can still recognize people using other cues like voice, hairstyle, or clothing. But the holistic perception of a face as something immediately familiar, warm, or meaningful is lost. And this single example illustrates something profound. We don't perceive reality. We reconstruct it from fragments, using highly specialized tools in our brain. Damage to a different region, say the area responsible for processing motion, can cause a condition called a kinetopsia, where the world appears as a series of static snapshots. Imagine watching someone pour a cup of tea, but instead of seeing a smooth stream, you only see frozen flashes of liquid, like a broken slideshow. Again, the eyes still function perfectly, but the brain's internal interpretation of time and motion is impaired. So, if we truly saw the world as it is, none of this would be possible. The world doesn't exist in your brain as it exists outside it. Instead, the brain is constantly filtering, reconstructing, and predicting what it believes you need to know, filling in the blanks, smoothing over imperfections, and sometimes even lying to you. All in the name of survival and efficiency. Our visual system does far more than simply detect light. It transforms raw stimulation from the retina streams of photons hitting the back of our eye into rich, structured experiences that actually help us navigate the world. Light on its own is meaningless to us. It's just energy bouncing off surfaces. What we see is not light itself, but a story constructed by the brain. The brain takes that minimal and fragmented input and builds something astonishing from it. It fills in the gaps in our visual field, where detail is missing or where the retina doesn't have direct access. It groups disconnected visual elements into coherent shapes and objects. It recognizes faces, scenes, and symbols, often in milliseconds. And it infers movement and depth, allowing us to understand where things are in space, how fast they're moving, and what actions we should take next. Without this enormous amount of interpretation and filtering, the world would appear as nothing more than shifting blobs of color and shadow. It is the brain's genius that turns those blobs into trees, buildings, people, and danger signs. But this also means something crucial. What you think you see is not what's out there, it's what your brain decides you need to see. The world you perceive is a tailored, adaptive hallucination, built for action and survival, not for truth. And it's this constructed experience, not raw reality, that becomes your lived world. There's a part of your eye that's completely blind, but you never notice it. Where all the nerve fibers exit the retina to form the optic nerve, there are no photoreceptors at all. This spot, known as the optic disc, is essentially a hole in your vision. It doesn't capture any visual information. And yet, if you look around right now, you won't see a black dot hovering in your field of view. Why? Because your brain quietly fills it in. Your visual system seamlessly guesses what should be in that gap based on surrounding context and presents you with a smooth, uninterrupted image. You see a full, continuous world not because your eyes are delivering it to you in full fidelity, but because your brain is stitching together the illusion of completeness. What's even more astonishing is that this blind spot isn't in the distant periphery, it's relatively close to the center of your vision. And yet, your brain handles it so well, you've likely never been aware of it unless it was pointed out to you in an experiment. This filling in isn't a bug. It's a feature, another brilliant example of how the brain constructs reality rather than merely recording it. And it's further evidence that what we think we see is not the world as it is, but a carefully curated version that the brain believes is good enough for our purposes. In other words, even your blind spot is invisible because your brain lies to you beautifully, as the visual cortex fills in the blind spot quietly. painting over the gaps in our perception. So too does it grant us a sense of stability and constancy in an ever-shifting world. When an object is partially hidden behind another, or bathed in shadows, or viewed from a different angle, we don't question its identity. A face remains a face, a cup remains a cup, even as lighting, perspective, or motion distort the image on our retinas. This remarkable trick is called perceptual constancy, and it's only possible because the brain isn't a passive receiver, it's an active interpreter, a master illusionist. But vision isn't the only sense that takes such liberties. Your other senses lie to you too in the most helpful ways. Your ears don't capture every sound wave with perfect accuracy. Instead, your auditory cortex filters, enhances, and sometimes fabricates sensations based on context. The McGurk effect, for instance, shows that what we see can actually change what we hear. Watch a person silently mouthing go while the audio says ball, and you might hear duh. That's your brain trying to reconcile conflicting sensory inputs, choosing the version of reality that feels most coherent. Your sense of touch is no more honest. The brain edits out sensations it considers irrelevant or redundant, like the constant pressure of your clothing or the slight asymmetry in how your socks fit. Only when attention is drawn do these details re-enter consciousness. Even your sense of smell and taste are shaped by expectations and prior experiences. The flavor of food isn't just a chemical reaction, it's also a story your brain is telling, influenced by memory, emotion, and context. That wine you thought was expensive, it tastes better, not because it is better, but because your brain believes it should be in every sense. Your brain is not giving you reality, it's giving you a tailored version of reality optimized for survival, for coherence, for speed. It smooths the edges, fills in the blanks, ignores the noise, and sometimes invents what's missing. Not because it's flawed, but because it's efficient. We do not perceive the world as it truly is. We perceive the world as it is useful for us to perceive. And that simple truth, once seen, changes everything. Each of these sensory processes, whether rooted in sight, sound, touch, taste, or smell, relies on an astonishingly complex and distributed network of neural computations. These computations are not handled by a single master control center, but rather by specialized regions across the brain, each uniquely tuned to a specific type of data and task. For example, when you hear a melody or a voice, your auditory cortex located in the temporal lobe decomposes that sound into its basic components: pitch, volume, timing, and location. Meanwhile, your language centers like Broca's and Wernicke's areas might be interpreting those sounds as meaningful words or emotional cues. And if you're watching someone speak, your visual system coordinates with your auditory cortex to align lip movements with speech, enhancing comprehension. These diverse functions are achieved through parallel processing, the brain's ability to compute different aspects of a sensory experience simultaneously in separate locations. This allows you to listen to a conversation, recognize a face, feel the texture of your coffee cup, and smell its aroma all in real time without any conscious effort. It's a symphony of specialization. And yet, despite this division of labor, the brain is also a master integrator. It combines outputs from these distinct sensory modules into one fluid, coherent experience of the world, a unified field of consciousness that feels simple, even though it's anything but. This orchestration doesn't just help us interpret the present moment, it helps us survive, adapt, and predict. Because perception is not merely about seeing the world, it's about interpreting what matters most from a flood of sensory data, and transforming that into decisions, actions, and memories. We don't just detect reality, we construct it with precision, limitation, and brilliance, all at once. And the more we understand this elegant machinery, the more we begin to see how remarkable and how selective our experience of the world truly is. The fact that vastly different parts of the brain process each sensory modality, vision, hearing, touch, smell, and taste, reveals something both profound and surprising about how perception actually works. Neurologically, these senses are handled by separate, specialized systems distributed throughout the brain. Yet, our lived experience of the world feels effortlessly unified. You don't see a face, then hear a voice, then feel the wind on your skin as disconnected fragments. You experience a person in a single moment, multisensory, coherent, and seamless. This integration happens so smoothly that we rarely stop to consider just how complex it is. Your visual cortex processes shapes, color, motion, and spatial relationships. Your auditory cortex translates air vibrations into language, music, and environmental sounds. Meanwhile, your somatosensory cortex detects pressure, texture, temperature, and yet, you never feel fragmented. Instead, the brain stitches together these diverse signals into a cohesive perceptual reality as if it were all happening in one unified space and time. This illusion of seamlessness is the result of neural integration, and it's largely constructed by higher-order brain regions like the parietal lobe, which bind together inputs from different senses. Other regions, such as the superior colliculus and association cortices, help synchronize this incoming data, aligning the timing and context so your experience feels continuous, and whole. So even though what you see and what you hear are processed in physically distant regions of the brain, your mind gives you the impression that they are part of one singular world. And that, perhaps, is the greatest illusion of all. The real world isn't just what's out there, it's what your brain makes of it. This paradox lies at the heart of one of neuroscience's most enduring mysteries, a puzzle known as the binding problem. At its core, the binding problem asks, how does the brain, with its modular and highly specialized structure, create the seamless, unified experience of consciousness that we each take for granted? Different regions of the brain process different aspects of perception: color, motion, shape, sound, smell, touch, each in isolation, often in separate lobes, sometimes even in different hemispheres. And yet, despite this fragmentation, our subjective reality feels whole. We don't experience fragmented slices of sight, sound, and sensation. We experience a rich, integrated world that flows continuously through time and space. We see a face, not a patchwork of lines, shades, and shadows. We hear a voice, not scattered frequencies. Somehow, the brain takes all these discrete inputs and knits them together into a coherent whole. But how? There is no single control center where all sensory information converges and is stitched together into conscious awareness. The brain is a distributed network, and while certain regions may synchronize their activity, especially in higher frequency ranges like gamma oscillations, this alone cannot fully explain the subjective unity we feel. Attention may act as a kind of spotlight, helping to bind certain features into a coherent object in our awareness, but the mechanism remains elusive. It's as though each brain module speaks its own dialect, yet the mind somehow hears a single, fluent language. This discrepancy between the modular nature of neural processing and the unity of conscious experience is more than a technical glitch in our understanding. It challenges the very framework through which we interpret the mind. It forces us to ask not only how perception works, but what consciousness is. If no single part of the brain contains the full picture, then the you who sees and hears and feels must itself be a construction and emergent phenomenon rising from billions of neurons firing in synchrony, moment by moment, without a conductor. The illusion of a seamless self, of a continuous world, is one of the brain's most remarkable and enigmatic achievements. And the more we learn about how the brain is divided, the more extraordinary it becomes that our perception feels so whole. We can begin to understand how the brain attempts to solve the binding problem, at least in the visual domain, by looking not at how perception succeeds, but at how it sometimes fails. It is in these cracks, these subtle glitches of awareness, that the inner workings of perception begin to reveal themselves. When the brain misfires, even for a moment, We are offered a glimpse behind the curtain and opportunity to witness the mechanics of consciousness in motion. Visual illusions, for instance, aren't just tricks or parlor games. They are windows into the algorithm that the brain uses to build reality. They show us that perception is not a direct imprint of the world upon our minds, but rather an interpretation guided by shortcuts, assumptions, and prior experience. When we see movement where there is none, or misidentify shapes and colors, the illusion exposes the brain's best guess at what it thinks should be there, not what actually is. These errors, whether they arise from fatigue, damage, or deception, reveal the modularity behind the scenes. A face might be detected, but not recognized. An object might be seen, but not placed in space. Each fragment of perception is handled by a different part of the brain, and when one module fails to report in, the illusion of seamless awareness begins to break apart. These moments, brief and canny, are reminders that what we call reality is a constructed image, woven together moment by moment from the fragmented signals of our senses. And so, the binding problem is not merely a philosophical riddle. It is the background hum of every waking moment. It is the silent work of the brain striving to unify the disjointed signals of vision, sound, touch, and thought into a coherent stream of being. When that unity is interrupted, we catch a fleeting glimpse of just how delicate and astonishing this internal symphony truly is. At its core, binding is the brain's invisible magic, a process so familiar, so constant, that we forget it's even happening. It is the quiet symphony of neural signals that allows us to take fragments of the world and perceive them as unified, whole. It is the act of combining what we see into what we understand, the color, the shape, the motion, the meaning woven seamlessly into a single percept. Imagine looking at a circle, blue in hue. The blueness and the roundness are processed by entirely different parts of your brain, different maps on the cortex, different rivers of information. And yet, in your awareness, they arrive as one. A blue circle. Not separate, not jumbled, but fused. This is binding. But sometimes, in the subtle noise of perception, the illusion stumbles. Under the right conditions, the brain's binding process slips, and we glimpse its scaffolding. What results is an illusory conjunction, a perceptual mistake that reveals the machinery behind the curtain. You might be shown a blue circle among green squares, and yet your brain reports seeing a blue square. It has taken the color of one object and the shape of another and accidentally glued them together. These errors are not bugs. They are features of a system that must make sense of the world quickly, often with incomplete information. The brain does not wait for perfect clarity. It predicts, it guesses, it fills in. And most of the time, this works beautifully. But when it fails, when the guess is wrong, we witness the fragility of our reality. This is the paradox of perception. The things we see feel so vivid, so whole, so unquestionably real. And yet they are, in many ways, crafted illusions. Crafted not to depict the world as it is, but to help us survive in it. Perception is not a mirror. It is a map. And binding is the hand that draws it. These moments of perceptual error, these illusory conjunctions, are not random. They don't arise simply from chaos, but from a brain trying its best to interpret a fast-moving world. And notably, we're more likely to experience these misbindings when our attention is divided or misplaced. If we're distracted, if our gaze is pulled elsewhere, if the object we're looking at lies in our periphery, or if there are other similar shapes nearby, the brain's precision begins to blur. It doesn't have time to double-check every detail. Instead, it guesses, matching the shape from one object with the color of another, quickly stitching them into a convincing but incorrect whole. It says, "That was probably a blue square," when in fact it was a blue circle next to a green square. You didn't notice. And so, the illusion holds. Attention, in this sense, is like a spotlight. It sharpens what it touches. When our attention is focused, binding is more accurate. The pieces align. But when our attention drifts, the seams of perception begin to fray. The brain, still needing to offer us a complete picture, fills in the gaps with its best approximations. This tells us something profound. What we perceive is not just about what enters our eyes, but about where we place our focus. The world we see isn't just built from light and matter, but from attention, what we notice, what we ignore, what we expect. And in the quiet spaces where we are not looking, the brain continues its eternal guessing game, trying to construct a seamless reality from scattered clues. It's not a failure. It's a feature. Evolution gave us perception not to capture truth, but to craft a useful story. And that story, beautiful as it may be, is full of shortcuts. Patients with damage to a region of the brain called the left parietal lobe, specifically an association area responsible for integrating information across multiple senses, often exhibit striking perceptual errors. This region acts like a neural crossroads, where signals from vision, touch, hearing, and spatial awareness converge and are blended into a unified experience. When this area is damaged, the brain's ability to bind different features of the environment together breaks down. One particularly dramatic symptom of this kind of disruption is simultanagnosia, a rare condition in which individuals are unable to perceive more than one object at a time. Even if multiple objects are in view, the brain fails to stitch them together into a coherent scene. A patient might see a spoon on the table but not notice the fork beside it. If asked to describe a picture of a woman standing in front of a house, the patient might report seeing only the house or only the woman, but not both at once. It's not a problem of eyesight. The visual input is intact. It's a failure in integration. These deficits reveal something remarkable about how perception works. Seeing is not the same as perceiving. Our brains do not passively absorb the world as a complete picture. Instead, they actively assemble it, drawing on attention, memory, and context to fill in the gaps. The parietal lobe plays a crucial role in this construction process, selecting, prioritizing, and connecting incoming sensory data into the seamless stream of consciousness we normally take for granted. When this system is compromised, the illusion of wholeness falls apart. The binding problem, how we experience unified perceptions from disconnected brain regions, becomes painfully visible. And through these errors, we gain insight into just how delicate and orchestrated our perception of reality truly is. Even with all the technological advances in brain imaging and cognitive neuroscience, we still don't fully understand how the brain solves the binding problem, how it manages to weave together color, shape, motion, sound, and meaning into the seamless perception of a single object or experience. However, one of the leading hypotheses is both elegant and profoundly intricate. Binding may be an emergent property of neural synchronization. This theory proposes that when distinct neurons, those responsible for encoding different features of the same object, begin to fire in synchrony, they create a unified perceptual experience. Imagine neurons responsible for color, shape, and motion scattered across different regions of the brain. Under normal circumstances, they might be operating independently. But when you focus your attention on an object, something astonishing happens. These neurons start to oscillate in harmony, pulsing together at the same rhythm. Like musicians in a symphony aligning to a shared tempo, this synchronization might be the key that allows the brain to say, "These features belong together. This is a red ball rolling to the left." In this view, perception isn't static, it's rhythmic. The brain binds features not by storing them in a single location, but by coordinating their activity in time. And this synchronization can shift, fade, or intensify depending on where you direct your attention, how alert you are, or what you expect to see. But this hypothesis, compelling as it is, remains incomplete. We don't yet know precisely what triggers the synchronization or how the brain keeps track of which features belong to which objects in a cluttered, fast-moving environment. And yet, somehow, in the face of this complexity, the brain gets it right most of the time. In the rare moments when it doesn't, we're given a glimpse behind the curtain, a peek at the machinery of the mind. We see how reality is not merely observed but constructed. And this construction, as intricate and fallible as it may be, is the best tool we have for navigating a world that is far more chaotic and complex than our perception would ever let on. The synchrony hypothesis stands out not just because of its elegance, but because of its remarkable adaptability. In contrast to static or hardwired systems, synchrony is inherently flexible, able to shift in real time depending on what we attend to, what we learn, or even what we expect. It's dynamic, capable of forming connections in an instant, only to dissolve them moments later when our focus changes. This flexibility is precisely what makes synchrony so powerful as a binding mechanism. It's not confined to a single brain region, nor is it limited by spatial constraints. Neurons can synchronize their activity across vast distances in the brain, bridging regions responsible for vision, sound, memory, and meaning. This means that even when information is processed in physically separated parts of the brain, it can be experienced as a single, unified whole thanks to the harmony of synchronized oscillations. Even more astonishing is that synchrony can be shaped by learning. As we experience the world, develop new skills, or focus our attention, the patterns of synchrony in our brain evolve. Connections that are used often become more easily synchronized in the future. This may explain why, with practice, complex perceptions become fluid and automatic, why a trained musician can hear an entire symphony in a few notes, or a chess master can perceive deep strategies in a quick glance at the board. Their brains have learned which features go together, and synchronization patterns have been refined to bind them effortlessly. In this light, the binding problem isn't just a mystery, it's a window into one of the most beautiful aspects of the brain, its ability to unify the fragmented, to bring coherence to chaos, and to transform scattered signals into meaning. Through synchrony, the brain doesn't just perceive the world, it weaves it into experiences. So, what is reality? Is it the light that enters your eyes? The sounds that echo in your ears? The fleeting textures beneath your fingertips? Or is it something far more elusive, a carefully crafted illusion built by your brain, stitched together from fragments of sensation, filled in by memory, emotion, and expectation? You do not perceive the world as it is. You perceive it as your brain predicts it should be. From blind spots to face recognition, from color illusions to sound hallucinations, your brain is constantly editing, filling in, and interpreting a version of reality that makes sense for you. It does this not to deceive you, but to help you survive, adapt, and find meaning. But here's the twist: once you become aware of the illusion, you can begin to see its edges. You can train your mind to question what it assumes, to explore what it ignores, and to notice the invisible strings shaping your experience. Because the real question isn't, do I perceive the world as it is? It's, can I become aware enough to know when I don't? Thank you for watching. If you found this journey into the mind fascinating, don't forget to subscribe, like, and share this video, because awareness, just like perception, grows when we choose to look closer. Until next time, stay curious and stay awake.